we go into Sean Rose with the stories making the news this week. Sean, what's up?
Greetings, Edgerenka. Greetings, viewers. Let's take a look at the budget. Government has given a $311,136,000 projected revenue for the fiscal year 2014-2015. The Premier and the Minister of Finance, Dr. Yolanda Smith, delivered that presentation in the House of Assembly on November 17. Now, the 1-hour presentation, as you would expect, touched on a number of matters concerning the local economy. For instance, some $278.3 million have been allocated for various government operations, such as employee compensation, goods and services, grants, social benefits, property and other expenses. And among those points that he raised, he indicated that some $5 million will be added to the reserve fund. Now, this is a very critical matter, because this will allow the government to, again, borrow monies without getting the approval of the UK government. Based on the projections outlined in what is called the medium-term fiscal plan, 2015-2017, by 2016, there should be some $64.48 million in the reserve fund, and by 2017, $79 million in the reserve fund. So basically, based on the records, the government is on track. Now, let's take a look, Cromwell, at what happened in 2011, because as we look back, we can see that there seems to be some disagreement between the two major parties as to the state of the Virgin Islands economy in 2011. We're going to start, though, by hearing from the Premier, as he says he has had to take some short-term pain in favor of long-term gain, some tough decisions, and he said that those decisions were influenced by contractual decisions taken by a previous government. Let's hear the Premier.
Madam Speaker, it's important that we have signed off on borrowing guidelines with Her Majesty's government. This is in our territory's best interest, because we now have a blueprint to order ourselves in our financial realm, and which also respects the very real contingent liabilities of Her Majesty's government, and at the same time allows us to operate within the guidelines in an autonomous manner. This has meant placing some emphasis on building our reserves. As a result of this, we'll be able to, as of 2017, once again secure loans for various capital investments without seeking the direct approval of Her Majesty's government. This was our objective from the start, and I am thankful that we are well on the way to restoring a level of autonomy we once enjoyed in the past, but was lost during our absence from office. Madam Speaker, this positive outlook is as a result of a sound stewardship over the last 3 years. Madam Speaker, my government has held firmly to the age-old philosophy that government is a continuum, a trust, if you will. We accept that contractual decisions taken by a predecessor government that may have even significant financial implications going forward must be dealt with. In this vein, my government has paid off all the bills created by my predecessors and have honored the commitments they created. Madam Speaker, in this difficult economy, this created challenges in moving my agenda for prosperity and growth forward at the pace that I wanted.
So that's the Premier giving you his take on the matter, Edgerenka. And before we look at it with some analysis, the VIP chairman, Honorable Julian Fraser, is of the view that he actually gave an address recently, and he's of the view that the economy, the BVI economy in 2011 was actually in good stead. Let's hear him.
The very healthy state in which the VIP left the country was revealed by the Premier during the question and answer period of the 7th sitting of the 3rd session of the 2nd House of Assembly on June 13, 2014. So not only was this a gross fabrication, but the NDP deceived you, the taxpaying public. The NDP was less than forthright to you about the state of the country's finances. Now, even the Minister for Health himself a man with some proficiency in financial matters, has stated repeatedly that government requires $20 million in cash each month to operate. So taking 3/4 of November 2011 and all of December, that amounts to $35 million. And taking the same NDP's claim that the VIP left a $30 million debt into consideration, which makes a total of $65 million in debt and expenses, I ask this question. Mr. Premier, you paid the $65 million in commitments, and you were left with $10 million. So where did $10 million disappear to? That is an unanswered question.
An unanswered question, the VIP chairman says. And I would suggest that the two parties are at variance over this issue. Clearly, Fraser thinks that the NDP did not get a bad hand.
Well, you have anything in the history that says what actually happens in what was the condition of the country, the state of finances in the country in 2011 around November?
Because the elections were in November.
Yeah. What was the state of the country? Then that was when the NDP took over. So what was the state of the finances then?
Well, we have another clip, and this time we're going to listen to Colin Roberts. He was actually the director at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and he was in the BVI in 2011, and he held a joint press conference in April of 2011 with then Premier Honorable Ralph T. O'Neill. And he gave these statements that were probably overlooked at that time.
The BVI is still currently in breach of the liquid asset ratio in the borrowing agreement between the BVI government and the UK. But revenue has held up rather well here in BVI. And I think the focus now is, with the government's commitment to achieve and maintain balance through the planning of public finances in the budget, the focus now is, are there the right mechanisms in place in the way in which public finances are managed in the BVI that makes sure that the political decisions taken by the government in balancing the budget are actually implemented.
So Colin Roberts, former director at the FCO in 2011, basically saying that the BVI government had exceeded the borrowing guidelines.
Yeah, so certainly my recollection of 2011 was, and it was a campaign issue, who was going to be best to go to England to negotiate a deal with the UK government for us to maintain our financial freedom. I remember one of the big issues was the fear that the British government was going to take over the BVI's finances because of the poor state of the finances at that time, exceeding the borrowing guidelines. As a matter of fact, I think the UK government even went as far as preventing the government of the day from spending the $15 million CDB loan to build the infrastructure. So there was a lot of fear in the public's mind. People were talking on the podium about how hard we fought for financial freedom from the UK, and now we're going to go back into that. And they had just taken over the Turks and Caicos, I think. So that added to the concern of the people of the territory. So I think the evidence seemed to be against Mr. Fraser's assessment. What is your view?
Because I can go based on the figures, and if in 2011 the amount of money in the reserve fund was 7.4 million, which basically tells me that if the government wanted to go for a loan, 7.4 million was not enough collateral for a bank to say, okay, you can really afford to pay me this loan, and in the event that you cannot meet your monthly payments, I can get some money from another part of your, or at least from a recurrent expenditure.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the bank. They couldn't. As you heard, Mr. Collins said, they were in breach of the liquid asset ratio.
Right.
And that meant that the 25% of the annual budget that was required to be in the reserve in order for them to borrow was not there. $7 million certainly was.
7.4 wasn't.
$7.4 million certainly wasn't nowhere near what it needed to be. So they couldn't borrow any more money because they had exceeded the borrowing guidelines. So right now you have a $39.4 million in the reserves, and the government was able to borrow for the cruise spare development,
Right.
was able to use the
Monies for the People's Hospital?
well, the monies for the infrastructure, the CDB loan, they were allowed to use the CDB loan to fix the roads and the sewage and so on. So certainly the country from that standpoint has to be better off. Now, when you come to what are the figures for economic growth? Have you experienced any economic growth?
Significant growth that has jumped from somewhere around 90 million to 90 to 90.9, I believe. But a significant increase in the economic growth in 2013 alone.
Right. So certainly, people, everybody is not going to achieve the great economic benefits at the same time. But I think it's safe to say, well, not safe to say, the facts are, based on the data, that certainly the country has turned around financially in terms of its stability and being within the approval by the British. The British is, of course, supporting all the actions the government has been taking, including the billing of the cruise spare. We heard the governor supported that. And certainly the hotels, the tourism has grown, financial services has grown. So the country certainly overall, the territory certainly overall seems to be, based on the figures, in a better position than in the past years.
If I may correct that statement I made earlier, it's actually close to $1 billion in GDP, $909 million in 2013.
Yeah. So certainly the country has been turned around and on the path to a positive growth and prosperity. So Minister Fraser has going to come better with some more data and some better information.
Well, one of the things that came out from that budget presentation, or after, we had the members of the opposition, Alvin Christopher and Honorable Foy, saying that the statements don't necessarily match up with the situation on the ground. The figures given by the Premier in his presentation doesn't match what's happening with the real situation on the ground. Again, the facts will speak for themselves. If you're saying that the figures presented by the finance officials here are questionable, then you'll have to prove otherwise.
Well, you have to go and bring some facts.
Yes.
Yeah, and talk is cheap. Everybody could say, can spew out any rhetoric they want, but we're dealing with data here, information based on what is actually happening in the economy based on research and figures, facts and figures. So, I think at this particular time in history of the BVI, we're going to be making decisions based on real figures and not just rhetoric. So I think that we need to come better than that. Sean, is interesting. It's going. I'm sure over the next few weeks, it's going to be a lot of talk about the budget and there's a lot of debate back and forth. But certainly, this is a campaign year coming up to 2015, and it's going to be an exciting time in the BVI to watch. Thank you very much for your report.